Hi, this is Nolan Burkhart, audio director at Fern Studios, and today I'm breaking down the music and audio for Astrohaulers. I want to preface this by sharing that most of the tools that I used are free, or quote-unquote free. I think that limitation actually helped in a lot of ways on this project, as putting limitations on yourself can actually help a lot with creativity, in my opinion. At the same time, obviously, it limits some important creative aspects of the design process. The physical tools I used were my microphone, my MIDI controller, and my monitors and my computer. My microphone is the Electrovoice RE20, which is a classic dynamic broadcasting microphone. I used this microphone to record some of the sound effects for Astrohaulers. My MIDI controller is the Arturia Keylab Mark II 61 key, which primarily aided with my workflow between DAWs. It allows me to easily navigate my DAW, level tracks, and produce creative ideas. My monitors are a pair of Mackie HR824s, and I also used Beyerdynamic DT990 Pro open back headphones. Let's start with the music. For this project, I use Ableton Live as my digital audio workstation of choice for music. I often switch between Steinberg, Cubase, and Ableton, but I found that Ableton would work best for this project, since I have been practicing the most with it recently. My version of Ableton is more limited than the full version, but Ableton has still some great features and stock plugins in my opinion. Let's dive into my personal favorite track, Hydrogen Lullaby. This soundtrack takes a lot of inspiration from the style of other video game music. I tried to incorporate elements of lo-fi hip-hop though to emphasize the relaxing nature of the atmosphere, such as ambiguous and soulful chords and low-quality dirty sounds. The chords for this track are simple, a D-flat minor 7th chord that switches to an inverted A major chord. The main pluck sound follows along this chord as well, mainly following a D-flat minor pattern. There's a lot of repetition in this track and in the other tracks that I produced. Melodic ideas and chords stay static but come and go, and gradually build as the track progresses. This fits the looping aspect of the music for each level within the game and makes it relatively seamless. You might have noticed listening to the music that there is no percussion in a majority of the tracks. That's very intentional. I feel like I wanted to convey the vastness and emptiness of space by creating a vague and/or somewhat confusing sense of time. I also did this through the use of different time signatures and lots of delay and reverb. One of the tracks is actually in 7/4. Bonus points in the comments if you can tell me which track it is. My most used VST plugins for music were Analog Lab 5 by Arturia, Vital by Vital Audio, and Lo-Fi 2 by Quiet Music. Analog Lab 5 is a massive collection of hardware synth emulations with huge amounts of customizability. I was most drawn towards the Yamaha DX7 and Oberheim OBXA emulated presets. Lo-Fi 2 is just a great plugin full of soft and distorted sounds. I use it in a lot of projects, and they recently released Lo-Fi 3, which I plan to pick up soon. Vital is an insanely powerful tool that is very similar to Serum by X4 Records, but it's free. It is a wavetable synthesizer with built-in effects. I use it for a majority of the sound design, which I will get into later. When crafting the sound for Astrohaulers, we knew we wanted retro styling with the art in the game, but it wasn't going to be strictly imitating the style of 80s and 90s games. I believe that is reflected in the music, where my philosophy was to take modern sounds and bring them down in quality. This would retain the complexity of modern sounds while giving it the crunchy fuzziness of the hardware from old consoles. I achieved this mostly through the effect of downsampling the sounds using a downsampler or a bit crusher, depending on the sound. Downsampling is when you intentionally decrease the amount of slices or samples carrying data in a waveform, while bit crushing is when you intentionally decrease the precision of the slice or sample. These effects create a sound that can be described as crunchy or fuzzy, that creates high frequency harmonics. For example, let's take this whoosh sound effect that I have on this track here. It already has a channel EQ and then the Redux plugin on Ableton, which is a mix of a downsampler and a bit crusher. We'll listen to what it sounds like by itself. Now let's listen to it. As we play it, let's bring the sample rate down. You can hear how that changes. Now let's see what happens when we alter the bit crusher. Pretty gnarly sound. During my mixing process too, I also use this plugin. It runs outside of your digital audio workstation, but it's called MIDI Meters. It's popular with a lot of music creators. It shows you a bunch of super useful, relevant information, so I can kind of focus on the balance as I'm listening to the track. Once I'm happy with the general mix, the panning, the EQ, I go export the audio, and we move the track over to Reaper. If you don't already know, Reaper is really common within game audio. I like using Reaper whenever I'm working with audio over MIDI. Generally, what I do to clean up the tracks once I'm happy with the mix is just a little bit of multiband EQ. Sometimes I'll add a compressor to kind of glue it together. I like using the LA2A from Universal Audio. So here I just added a little bit of a low shelf, couple bands here, just to clean it up. I did earlier, I used Soothe too, but I'm having some issues getting it to work. It's basically a dynamic EQ, kind of brings some of the harshness out of the mix in general. Then I just bring it up. I bring it into a limiter and bring it up to the correct level. Like I mentioned before, for designing sounds for the game, I use Reaper as my DAW. For sourcing my sounds, I use a mixture of my own original recordings and Vital presets, and some pre-recorded samples from Splice. Let's go over some of my sound design within the Vital plugin. Alright, here we are in Vital. I'm just going to go over a couple of the sound effects that I created within the plugin for the sound design for the game. Here we have a low pass filter. Here's the basis of the sound, this wavetable here, which goes from a pulse wave to a square wave to a triangle wave. It is a 16 voice unison with 10% detune, and I have this quantize function enabled here, which kind of creates a downsampling character to the waveform. Here I have an envelope with an instant attack and sloped sustain. It basically is controlling the waveframe here, so when I trigger the note, it basically pulls through the wavetable, mapping along to the sustain curve here on the envelope. I also have it controlling the drive on this downsampling distortion here. And then the other effect we have is a compressor that is compressing the middle frequencies. I also have just a standard triangle downwards low frequency oscillator here that is controlling here the pitch, and it is basically being mapped to these specific steps here. So it's creating a downwards arpeggiation when I trigger the sound. Now we're going to go over the ship sounds that I went through. So I went through a lot of different iterations, kind of deciding how I wanted to do the sound design for the ship. I ended up going with kind of more of a simple design. I used the sample function here on Vital and then used a sample of a box fan. I pitched it up, and then I basically controlled the pitch here with this LFO. So it's controlling the level as well as the pitch here. So that's kind of the takeoff sound effect. It also has some effects here, just a very tiny bit of a delay. The mix is very low here, probably about 5 or 10%. And then distortion as well, with downsampling about halfway drive. So if I turn off the effects, you can hear. Just sounds a little more clear. Here, this preset is basically for when it lands. It's a little loud there. Here are some of the other sounds I came up with. So this was a lot more complicated here. Basically have a logarithmic curve here on this LFO, and it's controlling a bunch of different parameters here. 12 voices, 25% detune, a comb filter here, then a low pass filter here. There's a lot of different effects, a flanger, delay, compressor, compressing everything. I really liked how this sound was initially, but it sounded when I came across the box fan type sound effect, I ended up liking that more. It just kind of fit in more. Then here is another spaceship sound design iteration. This one sounds a little, it's cool sounding, but I feel like it didn't fit the vibe of the game. I'll try a lower tone there. So yeah, it's pretty cool sounding. It's kind of here on the LFO2, this is controlling most of the other parameters, the flanger and the phaser. And then this LFO here, which is just kind of on and off square type wave here, is being controlled by LFO2 and the frequency of how long it's triggered. All right, here is one sound that I ended up using at least once, I believe. We have a high pass filter here, along with a LFO here that is controlling the level of the oscillator as well as the pitch here, and then it's transpose mapping to these frequencies here, kind of making a major third chord. Here we have a compressor that's just kind of a multi-band compressor hitting all different frequencies here, downsampling with the drive about halfway, and then just a little bit of a high frequency cutout here just to get rid of some of the higher end frequency harshness. And it kind of makes this fun little chime sound. This is a really similar iteration as well. It's basically the same thing, except the LFO is a little bit different and it has a little bit of delay as well. There were a couple other small sounds that I did in Vital as well, but I don't need to go over those. Those were the main ones. Alright, so that's a breakdown of a majority of the sounds I used in Astrohaulers designed in Vital. Let's move over to Reaper and go over some of my other sound design. Here we're in Reaper with some of the sound effects that are in Astrohaulers. I have the Path Create sound effect that is in the game here. Here's what it sounds like before I added some processing effects. Here it is with the effects. I used Kilohertz plugins, which are fantastic and free. I use them on a majority of the sound effects within the game. Just have some ring mod here on the stock setting, a low pass filter to remove some of the harshness in the high end, and then a frequency shifter just to bring the sound down a little bit. Here's what it sounds like afterwards. I'll bring it back up in volume because the original is pretty loud. Here is the box sounds, or the pickup sounds. Actually, this one is the drop-off sound effect, and then this track here is the pickup sounds. These sounds I actually recorded myself using a Pokemon card tin that I found in my closet. It had a lock on it, and I would close it and snap the lock at the same time. I'll put up a video here just so you can see what it looks like. Here's what it sounds like without the processing. I didn't do much to it. I just added some compression here, a 3-band EQ with a high shelf, a low boost, and then a mid cut, and then put a bit crush on it. Same for the other recorded track there. Up next, I have this click sound effect that I found that I liked that was used for selecting the spaceship. I didn't do much to this one. I just added a bit crusher on it. Let's jump into another project. Here is the project for one of the scrap sounds in the game. We were going to have a mechanic where the ship could get upgraded over time, and I created a sound effect for that. I wanted to showcase it here because I think it was pretty cool, but we didn't end up getting to use it. You'll notice that there's about 6 different layers on the sound effect, unlike the other effects used in the game, and that was also another intentional decision. I think for a majority of the effects that were in the game, it was good enough to have them at a single layer. I felt like when I was working on designing the sounds and trying out using multiple layers, it felt like it was too much for what the game was. Even this sound, even though it's cool, it does seem like a little too complicated for what Astrohaulers is as a game and the kind of vibe that it's trying to create. But I basically have on here just a bunch of industrial sounds, kind of welding. I think I like an electrical welding sound, some gear type sounds, and just other Foley that comes together really fast and gives you that kind of mechanical feedback that you would imagine from something getting upgraded really quickly. So here's the sound. I think it was pretty cool. Maybe it'll end up being used in our next project. Here's the station select sound effect, which I believe ended up getting added into the game a little bit late in version 1.1. Basically, I have 2 layers here. Here's the first layer without effects. Kind of a, as the sample describes, alien technology UI button sound. And then here's the other sound effect without its effects. I believe these both come from the same sound pack. Now for this layer here, I added a filter here, a pretty aggressive low pass filter with a little bit higher resonance. A bit crusher here, and then pitch shifted it down, so it ended up sounding like this. It mainly maintained the lower frequency there and cut off a bunch of the higher stuff. And then the bottom layer is just a what's called repitch. It's a native plugin for Reaper. Just pitch shifted it up and then added a bit crusher as well. And those both come together as this. And lastly here we have the station ambient sound effect. I created kind of a pulsing sound at Vital that sounds like this. It's very sub-heavy, so we have 2 filters here to take off a lot of the high frequencies and low frequencies, bit crusher, and then a ring mod here with the mix turned down a bit. Here's what it sounds like now. Kind of adds a little bit of ringing on the top. Now we'll move into the Fmod project breakdown for Astrohaulers and go through how the sounds were implemented into the game. Here's the Fmod project for Astrohaulers. You can see I have all these folders organized here with the different audio events here in each folder, and they're properly color-coded. That was just my way of organizing the project and making it easier to keep track of which audio events went to which general groups. You can see I also followed a specific naming convention to help with the programmers in order to implement the sounds. Now for each individual event, most of the sounds in the game are just simple action sheets. This game was my first time using Fmod, And so I kept most of the sounds pretty simple. I did mess around with some other more higher level functions, which I'll show here in a minute. But yeah, most of the simple sounds here are just action sheets that just trigger when the event is called upon in the code. For the music, they're laid out as timeline sheets. So we have basically two versions of the track Earth's Embrace. As you can see here, when this event is triggered at the beginning of the level, it'll play through the first time, and then it'll start this loop point here, which basically has this reverb tail attached at the beginning, and it will allow for the sound to seamlessly loop over and over again. We also have this music random event from earlier iterations in the game. Before we sorted out how many levels we wanted, we basically had the music randomized for each level. So each time you would start the level or the song would play through, it would just play a random track. And of course I accomplished this using a multi-instrument. I also used a multi-instrument for the package drop and package pickup sounds, as there are 3 different iterations of each sound, and it will just randomize each time a package is picked up. The last one I want to go over here is the station hum ambience sound effect. It basically plays whenever your cursor is close to a station and uses what's called a spatializer here to adjust the volume of the sound based on how close or how far your cursor is. So even though this is a 3D preview, I can demonstrate the idea here by moving this cursor around. Here's the mixer window for the project. We have groups here that are controlling different events. We have sound effects, which is divided into Foley, menu, and UI notifications. So we have Foley, menu, UI notifications. Then I have fail and win, which I'll explain in a second. Music, and then of course SFX that I just explained. You can see I have specific leveling for each of these tracks that I adjusted throughout the testing process after getting feedback from playtesters in the game. So we have snapshots here, which are basically specific events that can be called in the code that will basically create specific instances of tracks being turned down. So I have the pause state here, which basically mutes the Foley UI notifications. The other tracks are irrelevant. And then I have a low pass filter that's applied on the music. So when you pause the game, it will apply the low pass filter and make the music quieter and kind of in the background. Next, I have the fail state, which basically will mute everything else and will play the fail event whenever the player fails the game. And then it's the same for the win here. So that's basically it. That's everything I did within Fmod. The project's pretty simple. It was, like I said, it was my first game that I worked on with Fmod, and so most of the functions that I did were pretty simple. So let's wrap up the video. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of the music and sound effects for Astrohaulers. For other audio or music folks, if you have any pointers or advice that you'd be willing to give me, especially as a beginner, I would love for you to leave any kind of comments or anything on this video. Otherwise, look forward to seeing the next Astrohaulers breakdown videos, and we'll see you later.